important to start to think about eastern Syria or northeast Syria in U.S. strategic terms. The area of Syria that the United States has ended up in without much long-term thinking is about the size of West Virginia. It's larger than the Netherlands and smaller than Ireland. It is now situated in a place that links policy problems to both Turkey, Iran, Russia, and obviously the Syrian regime. It also is a kind of triangular shaped area that, if you look at the areas around it, their stability probably hinges on what happens there. And it's one of the main area of operations against what remains of Islamic State, which is estimated to have around 15,000 fighters who have gone to ground or ended up in sleeper cells since ISIS lost its physical caliphate in late March of 2019. U.S. policy in eastern Syria is a kind of form of mission creep, in the sense that it was initially designed as a relatively narrow policy against ISIS. It grew into a policy in which U.S. presence in Syria was seen as a counterweight against Iranian influence. And then in December 2019, it shifted again into the desire to withdraw. And this year, it looks like the U.S. will remain, but only in a very, very limited role, which the recent Pentagon Inspector General report released on August 6th says has ramifications in terms of the resurgence of ISIS, and also, of course, the 2,000 ISIS fighters who are foreigners and the roughly 8,000 or so other ISIS fighters from Iraq and Syria that are being detained in Syria. And that includes, of the 2,000, around 800 from Europe, along with another 40 or 50,000 members of their families or women and children linked to them that came out of Baghouz. That's a lot of people, especially in an area of Syria that is relatively sparsely populated. So, one question to ask about eastern Syria is, what does everyone want? What are the agendas or what are the goals of the other countries? So, Iran's goal is quite clear. Iran wants to entrench in Syria. It wants to support the regime's victory. Russia's goal is very clear. It wants the regime to win, not at all costs, but it wants the long term that the Syrian regime will be preserved, and obviously that Russian influence will therefore be preserved. The Syrian regime's goal is clear. What is Turkey's goal? Well, Turkey initially supported the Syrian rebellion, but once the PKK war broke out in 2015 and there was the attempted coup in 2016, Turkey clearly shifted its Syria policy, especially in the operations Euphrates Shield and Olive Branch and Afrin in 2018, to a policy that was directed at defeating the PKK and what it thinks is, or what it says is obviously the YPG that is linked to the PKK, and therefore the SDF, which Turkey says is also linked to the YPG and therefore the PKK. So from Ankara's perspective, this is what they've called either a cancer or a terrorist corridor or a terror army that they see as gobbling up pieces of the border alongside Turkey, which is a border of, I think, more than 500 or 600 kilometers. So what Ankara has done is take over large swaths of that border. It took them over using Syrian rebel allies, but not to fight the Syrian regime. And long term, Ankara probably would prefer the Syrian regime return to the border as opposed to obviously the YPG or SDF having a role there. So that's Ankara's goal, as it has clearly stated, is that it wants to launch a third piece of this offensive into the area east of the Euphrates to create what it calls a peace corridor, or safe zone. So, but the overall goal, and Ankara clearly states that, is that it would like to eradicate and destroy any group linked to the PKK in any country near Turkey. That means also Iraq and Syria. And that's why Turkey is fighting a war in northern Iraq that includes airstrikes and numerous military bases. So Turkey's goal is pretty clear as well. Israel's goal, which is another neighbor of Syria, is also relatively clear. Israel also wants Iran to leave Syria, or at least to reduce Iranian entrenchment. So that puts the United States in a strange position, because the U.S. is the only country on this list that doesn't really have a clear goal about the long term in eastern Syria. The U.S. said it wanted to do stabilization or defeat ISIS, or that it wanted to use it as some sort of a leverage relating to Iran. There's kind of another problem. The fact that Turkey accuses the United States of what it calls training a terrorist army, which is the U.S. says is about now more than 100,000 members of the SDF and its related security forces. The fact that Russia accuses the United States of using the Tanf base near the Jordanian border to also train terrorists or militants, which the Syrian regime in Russia have accused the U.S. of training Syrian rebels. The fact that two of the other major players there view the U.S. as basically training terrorists, and that Iran obviously already calls the United States policy economic terrorism, means that Turkey, Russia, and Iran now share more in common than they share in terms of any sort of problems in Syria. So all of them have a mutual goal to remove the United States. And for different reasons, because obviously for the Syrian regime or the Russians or even the Iranians, the YPG, PKK, SDF issue is not as big, but Iran does want closer relations with Turkey and economic relations. Russia is selling the S-400 to Turkey, which means that Russia has interests with Turkey in terms of arms trade, and Russia has the Turk Stream pipeline, which is very important. Economically, Turkey is probably more important to Russia now than Iran or Syrian regime is. So these countries have all come together, and they've come together already on Syria for several years because they've been working on this Astana peace process. Initially, they were probably not as close and on the same page in terms of Russia, Turkey being on one side and Russia around the other. But it seems that in the last year, they've cemented closer ties, and we can see that in Russia giving a blank check to Turkey to go into Afrin, which is part of Syria, and obviously Russia, holding the Syrian regime for being too angry about that. And we can see that Russia needs the Turkish role in Idlib to prevent another major conflict there. So it's very important that through the S-400 deal and other deals, Russia has some leverage over Turkey, Turkey has leverage over Russia, and these countries are all kind of increasingly becoming part of the same side, and certainly all that side opposes the United States. So the U.S. has two challenges there. One is that the three other major players all oppose its role, and the second challenge is the U.S. doesn't even know exactly what its long-term role is. So if you think that politics has anything in common with the Clausewitz theory of wars, politics by other means, or that somehow most of your goals should sort of align, i.e. the Pentagon, State Department, and USAID, and everyone should be on the same page, then the United States has a very, very unclear policy, and that puts it on the back foot against its adversaries, all of which seem to have a more clear policy, or at least one that is maturing and growing towards policies that have things in common, and in which the United States is 2019, those are some of the major challenges the United States faces in northeast Syria.